You ever see someone try to fix a collapsing mansion with, like, a single roll of duct tape?
Oh, yeah. Just the absolute worst tool for the job.
Right. Picture this massive, sprawling estate. The foundation is violently cracking. The roof is actively caving in.
Plumbing is completely exploded.
Exactly. And the person in charge runs out, not with steel beams or concrete, but with, ordinary office supplies, thinking, yeah, this will hold it together.
It's just total denial of the physical reality.
It really is. And that is exactly what happened to the Soviet Union in 1991. You, the listener, sent us the Wikipedia article on the State Council of the Soviet Union, which is this desperate blink-and-you-miss-it government body.
Right. It existed for barely 4 months, right at the end of the Cold War.
Yeah, barely 4 months. So our mission for this deep dive today is to figure out how a superpower tries to patch a mortal wound with bureaucratic committees. You specifically mentioned you were looking for those aha moments to understand the mechanics of history.
Which is a great way to look at it. You want to see the gears turning without getting buried under an avalanche of dry dates.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this, because we're going to look at the actual administrative reality of a collapse.
And, when we think of the fall of the Soviet Union, our minds immediately go to those really dramatic, sweeping visuals.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
The protests in the streets, people standing on tanks.
Right, the lowering of the hammer and sickle flag over the Kremlin. But what we're really dissecting today is the hidden machinery behind those visuals.
The paperwork behind the protests.
Yeah, basically. How does a massive, heavily centralized bureaucracy actually try to catch itself while it's, in a terminal freefall?
Because the central premise here is almost absurd, right? You've got an existential crisis, the whole system is breaking down, and the grand solution they come up with is a council.
A committee. The ultimate bureaucratic reflex.
But what really blew my mind reading through the sources you provided is that the origin of this council wasn't even born out of an emergency at all.
No, not at all. And what's fascinating here is that to understand the absolute chaos of 1991, we actually have to rewind the clock a couple of decades.
Wait, a couple of decades?
Yeah, back to the early 1970s. The concept of a Soviet State Council had been sitting in a drawer for years, and it was born out of pure, unadulterated diplomatic vanity.
So it wasn't designed to save a failing state.
Nope. It was designed to fix a seating arrangement.
That is wild. Okay, walk me through this.
So, in the early 1970s, Leonid Brezhnev was the head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Okay. And as head of the party, he's the guy, right? The de facto leader.
Exactly. Everyone domestically and internationally knew he was the man making the decisions. He was the center of gravity.
Yeah.
But on paper, within the incredibly rigid intricacies of formal diplomatic protocol, he was actually outranked.
He was ranked third, which is just, it's wild to conceptualize.
It really is.
You are the unquestioned leader of one of the two global superpowers. You control a massive nuclear arsenal. But when it comes time for, official state banquets...
Or global photo ops on the tarmac.
Yeah, you are essentially standing in the bronze medal position.
Because the rules of international diplomacy do not care about unofficial power dynamics. They only care about constitutional titles.
Right. So who is actually number one on paper?
The first position, the formal head of state, belonged to Nikolai Podgorny. He was the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet.
Okay.
And then the second position, the head of government, belonged to Alexei Kosygin, the chairman of the Council of Ministers.
So Brezhnev, despite holding all the actual leverage, is relegated to the third tier.
Just because his title was purely within the political party, not the state apparatus itself.
I love trying to picture this in a modern corporate setting.
Oh, it translates perfectly.
Right. It's like you're the true, undisputed CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You make every strategic decision. But technically, your HR title is, senior advisor.
Yeah, exactly.
So every time you go to a major industry conference, the events team legally has to seat you at the third table behind the head of PR and the chief operating officer.
And you just have to sit there eating your lukewarm chicken, seething about the fact that the PR guy gets to shake hands with the keynote speaker first.
That would drive anyone crazy, especially an autocrat.
Well, human ego, even at the geopolitical level, is a profound driver of history. And Brezhnev's supporters decided they needed to fix this discrepancy.
But they couldn't just walk up to the United Nations and ask them to change global protocol, right?
No, the UN wouldn't care. So they decided to try and change the fundamental structure of the Soviet government itself, just to accommodate his ego.
They wanted to invent a completely new body, the State Council.
Exactly. They looked at other Eastern Bloc countries, specifically East Germany, Bulgaria, and Romania.
Right, because those nations had established state councils as their highest bodies of power.
Exactly. So the plan within the Kremlin was to abolish their existing presidium of the Supreme Soviet, replace it with a brand new state council, and have Brezhnev chair it,
This maneuver would finally give him the official head of state title.
moving him to the coveted #1 spot in diplomatic protocol.
I mean, they were literally willing to rewrite the constitution of a superpower just to get their boss a better seat at the table.
They were. But the bureaucratic inertia of the Soviet system actually fought back.
The system pushed back on Brezhnev.
It did. The system was just too entrenched. When the new Brezhnev constitution was finally debated and adopted in 1977, the conservatives within the government pushed back hard.
So they didn't get the council.
No, they ended up keeping the collegial presidium of the Supreme Soviet as the highest body of power. The state council idea was just shelved.
Wow. So it was just a failed vanity project, a bureaucratic ghost lingering in the administrative background.
Exactly. And this is one of those aha moments you were looking for in the prompt. We often read history backward.
Right. Assuming every institution was built for some profound structural reason or grand ideology.
Yeah, but sometimes a proposed constitutional amendment is literally just about a guy wanting to walk through a door first.
That is amazing. But that ghost of a vanity project stayed in the drawer until history came calling with a genuine existential crisis.
And history didn't just call, it kicked the door down.
Literally. So fast forward, we are in August 1991. The Soviet Union is experiencing a catastrophic failure.
The August coup.
Right. A group of hardline communist officials attempts a coup d'etat against Mikhail Gorbachev to, stop his reforms. The coup fails, but the damage to the central authority is terminal.
The office of the vice president is entirely abolished because the vice president was actually one of the coup leaders.
Oh, God.
The central government is just in absolute free fall at this point.
The structural integrity of the state was completely shattered.
Yeah, the central authority had been fundamentally compromised, and the constituent republics saw their opening.
And just to make sure we're grounded here, before we get into the new councils, we need to clarify the map for a second.
Good idea.
When we talk about the republics pulling away, specifically Boris Yeltsin gaining power in Russia, we're talking about the Russian Republic pulling away from Gorbachev's overarching Soviet government, right?
That is a crucial distinction. The Soviet Union was a federation of 15 republics.
Like states in the U.S., sort of?
Sort of, yes. And Russia was just one of those republics, albeit by far the largest and most powerful.
Okay, so Gorbachev was the president of the entire Soviet Union, and Yeltsin was the president of the Russian Republic.
Exactly. They were both physically sitting in Moscow, but Yeltsin's Russian government was essentially seceding from Gorbachev's Soviet government.
Okay, that context makes this next move even crazier, because the central authority is vanishing, the republics are pulling away, and so the ghost of the 1970s is resurrected.
The state council is back.
Yes. On September 5th, 1991, the State Council of the USSR is officially formed as the highest organ of state power for a transitional period.
And it holds immense authority on paper. It can elect a prime minister. It can choose a successor if Gorbachev is absent.
But the membership is what absolutely baffles me. It's Gorbachev and the highest officials of the Soviet republics.
The very people actively dismantling his empire.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. You have an empire falling apart because the constituent parts want out. And the central government's solution is to take the leaders of those breakaway republics, put them in a council, and hand them the ultimate authority over the entire state.
I know, it sounds completely backward.
Why would Gorbachev or the central government think this was a unifying move? It feels like you're driving a bus, the passengers are actively trying to hijack it, and your strategy to maintain control is to just say, here, you take the steering wheel.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that Gorbachev was entirely out of options.
He had nothing else to play.
Right. This wasn't some theoretical exercise in statecraft. It was a desperate concession to reality.
Okay, so it was forced on him.
The source material highlights this dynamic pretty neutrally, but structurally, the Central Soviet government couldn't enforce its will anymore. The republics already had the de facto power on the ground.
They already controlled the streets.
Exactly. The creation of the State Council was an attempt to institutionalize that reality within a federal framework.
It's almost like saying, you can't fire me because I'm putting you in charge of my employment.
That's a great way to put it. By giving the republic presidents the highest state power within a union structure, Gorbachev was hoping to give them a reason to stay in the Union.
A gamble.
A huge gamble. He thought if they became the ultimate authority of the overarching Soviet state, perhaps they wouldn't feel the need to completely dismantle it.
Okay, so while the State Council is sitting at the political summit, trying to pretend they still have a country to run, the physical reality on the ground, the actual day-to-day economy, is turning into absolute alphabet soup.
The political crisis immediately triggered an economic crisis,
Yeah.
which required an entirely different parallel set of emergency measures.
Right, because people still need to buy bread.
Exactly. So Gorbachev establishes a four-man committee to elect a new cabinet of ministers.
Okay, let me make sure I have these names right. You've got the Russian Premier Ivan Selayev leading it,
Correct.
along with Grigory Yavlinsky, Arkady Volsky, and Yuri Lushkov.
Yes, and this little group quickly evolves into COMES, the Committee on the Operational Management of the Soviet Economy.
And Selayev is named the chairman.
The naming conventions alone tell a story of an administration frantically trying to sound legitimate,
Oh, absolutely. Operational management sounds so official.
And the escalation of power for this committee is just dizzying. By August 28th, the Supreme Soviet temporarily gives COM6 the exact same authority as the Cabinet of Ministers.
Which essentially makes Ivan Selayev the de facto prime minister of the fading Soviet Union.
Basically, yes. But it doesn't stop there.
Of course not.
COM6 is then surpassed in authority by another new body, the IEC, the Inter-Republican Economic Committee.
And let me guess who leads that. Ivan Selayev again.
You guessed it. He's chairman of COMPAS, he's chairman of the IEC, and he is presiding over an economy that is structurally dissolving in real time.
I'm trying to wrap my head around how impossible that job is.
It's completely impossible.
The sources note Selayev was supposed to initiate sweeping market economic reforms in a way that suited both the central government and the increasingly independent Soviet republics.
Right. An inherently contradictory mandate.
He has to maintain an integrated economy across the whole Union, while simultaneously initiating marketization, while the Union itself is actively breaking apart.
Yeah.
It's like trying to untangle a massive, sprawling server farm while all the computers are still live, but half the IT department has already quit and locked the server racks on their way out. How do you even begin to physically manage that?
You don't, because the mechanisms of a command economy rely entirely on a commander.
Right.
When Selayev first took office in this new role, his initial instinct was decentralization. He wanted to reduce the powers of the central government and hand more authority over to the individual Soviet republics.
Letting them manage their own transitions, which actually seems like the smart political play. He's trying to adapt to the fact that the republics hold all the cards now.
It makes sense politically, but the physical reality of supply chains quickly destroyed that plan.
Oh, because they were all connected.
Deeply connected. When Selayev tried to let the republics handle their own economies, the interwoven Soviet system instantly broke down.
Wow.
A factory in Ukraine suddenly stopped shipping vital tractor parts to a massive collective farm in Russia because they no longer shared a cohesive currency policy.
Or they just wanted to hoard the parts.
Right. They had instituted sudden export bans to protect their own local markets. Selayev realized you can't have a functioning economy if 15 different republics are writing 15 different sets of trade rules overnight.
Chaos.
Total chaos. Without a functioning center to force coordination, mass starvation and total industrial collapse were imminent.
So his view abruptly changes.
Completely. He does a total 180 and demands that Boris Yeltsin give back much of the central authority he had just usurped.
Wait, I'm confused.
Yeah.
You just said the central government was practically a ghost and the republics held all the actual power on the ground?
Right.
Selayev is a smart political operator. Why would he think he could just demand power back from Yeltsin? What leverage did he possibly think he had at that point?
He had absolutely no leverage, only desperation.
Seriously, he just asked nicely.
Well, he was relying on the terrifying reality of the looming economic collapse to convince Yeltsin to cooperate. He was essentially telling Yeltsin, if you don't give the center some power back to manage the supply chains, your own Russian Republic is going to starve.
But Yeltsin didn't blink.
Not for a single second. Yeltsin had the momentum, he had the popular support, and he had the actual resources.
The republics were not going to surrender the autonomy they had just seized.
Even if it meant economic chaos in the short term. Salayev's attempt to rein Yeltsin back in severely weakened his own political position.
He tried to put the genie back in the bottle.
And the genie simply fired him.
Wow. By September 26th, an anti-Sileyev faction, led by his own first deputy premier, Oleg Lobov, manages to oust him.
And Lobov succeeds him as the acting premier of the Russian Republic.
So Sileyev's ousting was the glaring signal that the experiment was over.
It proved that the Central Soviet government, despite all its new councils and committees, was rapidly losing any remaining grip it had. The real consequential power struggles were now happening entirely within the republics themselves.
Not at the federal level. Okay, so Sileyev's utter failure to rein in Yeltsin proved the center was dead domestically. But a dying empire doesn't just have to manage its own citizens, it has to manage the rest of the world.
Right.
How on earth did they project power to Europe or the United Nations when they couldn't even control the tractor factories in Moscow?
They did it through pure diplomatic theater. The central government was still trying to project an illusion of authority on the international stage.
Even though the house was burning down.
Exactly. So the IEC, that Inter-Republican Economic Committee we just talked about, eventually transforms yet again. Now it's called the Interstate Economic Committee of the Economic Community.
That is quite the mouthful.
And its sole function at this point is just trying to coordinate relations between republics that are actively declaring their secession from the USSR.
They are essentially managing their own divorce proceedings.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But they're still trying to act like a unified entity to the outside world. And this leads to one of the most incredible tragicomic details in the entire source text.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, the Energy Charter.
Yes. We are in mid-December 1991. The Interstate Economic Committee decides to show the world that it still has international intent and relevance.
So on December 16th and 17th, they participate in the signing of the European Energy Charter alongside 35 other countries.
The Central Soviet government proudly puts its pen to paper on a major international agreement.
But the authority of that signature was entirely hollow because the constituent parts of the state were ignoring it in real time.
Right. The article notes that this grand international gesture was completely undermined.
Because 9 of the 12 remaining Soviet republics also stepped up and signed the charter individually.
Right, at the same time.
You have the ghost of a central government signing a document while its own constituent parts are standing right over its shoulder signing it for themselves.
It's amazing.
It is the diplomatic equivalent of a teenager's parents signing a permission slip and the teenager tapping the teacher on the shoulder and saying, "Actually, I'm an adult. I'll sign for myself. Thanks."
Exactly. And this raises a really profound question about the very nature of state legitimacy. When does a government actually cease to exist?
Because legally, formally, the Soviet Union was still a recognized state on December 16th.
Yes, but practically, mechanically, that Energy Charter incident proved it was a phantom. The international community and the republics themselves had already moved on.
The central authority was a costume with no one inside it.
Just an empty suit.
And the timeline of the final collapse from there is just breathless. I mean, December 16th and 17th is the Energy Charter debacle. By December 19th, ComSE, that Operational Economic Committee, is just outright dissolved by a decree from the Russian Republic.
Not a union decree. Yeltsin's Russian decree simply deletes a Soviet federal committee.
Incredible. Then, December 25th, Gorbachev announces his resignation as president, and the Union government essentially ceases to exist.
And finally, on December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved by the Soviet of the Republics.
Just 112 days.
That's it.
That was the entire lifespan of the State Council of the Soviet Union, from September 5th to December 26th. An institution that started in the 1970s as a petty scheme to get Leonid Brezhnev a better seat at a banquet.
Lay dormant for a decade and a half.
And was suddenly revived in 1991 as an emergency life raft for a drowning superpower. And it sank in less than 4 months.
This is the exact aha moment you were looking for, though. We often assume that institutions create power. We think the title, the office, the Constitution is what gives a government its strength.
Right.
But the State Council proves the exact opposite. Power creates institutions. And when the actual power leaves, when the physical control of the economy and the trust of the constituent parts evaporates, the institution is just an empty shell.
It's just paper.
Yeah. No amount of renaming, restructuring, or forming new emergency councils can mandate unity if the underlying reality has fractured.
The structure only exists because we collectively agree it does, which leaves us with a pretty chilling thought to carry forward. Well, we've talked deeply today about the bureaucracy of this collapse, right? The committees and the paperwork. But what happens to the physical assets when the legal fiction of a state vanishes overnight?
That is the scary part.
On December 25th, Gorbachev resigned. On December 26th, the state legally dissolved. Think about the thousands of nuclear warheads sitting in silos across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Russia.
Just waiting there.
Think about the millions of active-duty soldiers, the global spy networks, the submarines patrolling the oceans that suddenly legally belong to a country that no longer existed.
It's a terrifying implication of a bureaucratic collapse.
In those chaotic 24 hours, while the politicians were busy dissolving the paperwork of the empire, who was actually holding the steering wheel for all those weapons,
When the paper state vanishes, the physical reality remains.
something for you to mull over the next time you see a massive system start to fracture. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking great questions.